questions on those two items. I'm not going to have you read the firms until this evening, but I want to thank the city attorney's office for adding in the firms into the caption that was missing from this morning. I think that was a great addition. Under mayor's office, we do have 2 appointments to the Beer and Record Board. Madam Attorney, they're short. If you don't mind, read those.
Of course. Item E, a resolution confirming Mayor Kelly's appointment of Tara Veland to the Beer and Record Board for District 2 with a term expiration of July 31st, 2024. Item F, a resolution confirming Mayor Kelly's appointment of Owen Seaton to the Beer and Record Board for District 1 with a term expiration of July 31st, 2024.
All right, seeing no lights, we do have a planning item for a planned unit development we will cover this evening, so no reason to read that unless council requests it. We'll move into purchasing questions. I believe we have 13 purchases for this evening and 1 request for proposal. You've had that in your packet this week. Do you have any questions, council, on purchases or the request for proposal? Seeing none, if you will turn to our June 21st agenda. And let me know if you have any questions on any ordinances or resolutions on June 21st. If we do not have any, we will then move into items for future considerations. And as I'm monitoring the board, I'm seeing no lights, which means you have looked over and you have had no questions. Oh, I do see a question now. Dr. Burrs.
Brent,
I remember when Brent used to sit close to us.
I know. So some follow-up information relative to Councilman Smith's request to bifurcate the $75,000 matter. Are we going to be getting a report on that?
Yes, I wanted to wait until we got through today since this is 2 more weeks out and we can always
Right.
push it another week. But yes, I have some information from the attorney's office as well as some process information that I want to document and send to council members, and then I can speak with each of you individually.
Okay, thank you.
You good, Dr. Burrs?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldberg. Moving into, that's all we have for future considerations. We have no department reports today. We do have a Parks and Public Works Committee meeting. I believe we have a consent decree quarterly report, if that's still on deck. Tom?
Oh, it is.
We're ready for that.
We are ready.
Okay, well, let's get the chairman into this seat, and then we will kick off that committee. And I'll turn the chair over to Chairman Hester.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Welcome to Parks and Public Works Committee. Can we accept minutes? Second. Thank you. Madam Attorney, excuse me. Can you read H, I, and J, please?
Yes, let me get on my right agenda. Sure. Item H, a resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works to approve change order number 1 with Davis Key Outdoor of Chattanooga, Tennessee for a contract number Y15008-204 Avondale Youth and Family Development Center landscaping project for an increase of $11,007 for final reconciliation of unit pay items for a revised contract amount of $119,902. Item I, a resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works to award a continuing on-call professional surveying services blanket contract number E22002901 with the following 8 consultant firms: ASA Engineering and Consulting, Barge Design Solutions, Sensor Engineers, Croy Engineering, Earthworks, Reagan Smith Associates, the RLS Group, Vaughn and Melton Consulting Engineers, based on their qualifications within the identified service categories for 1 year of a 4-year term for an annual amount of $1 million for use by all departments. Item J, a resolution authorizing Mayor Kelly to amend the Hamilton Place Boulevard modification contract, PIN 127492 for the Tennessee Department of Transportation to execute a right-of-way phase federally funded project on behalf of the city with the city's 20% share in the amount of $440,800 with right-of-way costs in the amount of $2,204,000.
Thank you. I see no hands. Can we move to next week resolutions? F, please.
Item F, a resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works to award contract number W21-012-0101, professional services for program management of the consent decree implementation to Jacobs Engineering Group, Inc. for 1 year of 5 with 4 annual renewals for an amount not to exceed $3.4 million.
Thank you. I see no hands. G, please.
A resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works to renew the professional services contract number W18001 for the support of wastewater capital improvements program for year 5 of 5 to the 19 firms listed that submitted qualifications in these 6 different categories per their qualification package as follows: ICOM Technical Services, Inc., Allen and Hoschel, Amec Foster Wheeler Environmental Infrastructure, Arcadis US, Brown and Caldwell, Burns and McDonnell Engineering Company, Barge Design Solutions, Inc., C2RL, Inc., CDM Smith, CTI Engineers, Fulgham, McIndoe and Associates, Gresham Smith and Partners, Hazen and Sawyer, HDR Engineering, Jacobs Engineering Group, Lamar Dunn and Associates, Sandtech Consulting Service, Volkert, WK Dixon and Company in the amount of $10,218,924.
Thank you. I see no hands. H, please.
A resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works to erect commemorative secondary street name signs on West 35th Street from St. Elmo Avenue to Broad Street, designating this section of West
Sure.
35th Street as commemorative. Officer Clarence Hamler Street as Patrolman Hamler was shot and killed during a robbery at a grocery store in 1977.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll move to the quarterly consent decree update. Thank you, Madam Attorney. Yes.
Thank you, council member. So I'm Tom Hutkin, I'm the Public Works Administrator, and we wanted Mr. Mark Heinzer, who is our wastewater director, come and present this all today, and he couldn't be here, so you're stuck with me. And then Bill actually will join in a little while and do the heavy lifting on the detail. Important pointing out is the success of this program. Mark overseeing the wastewater system entirely, and then Bill before, during, and after overseeing the projects as city engineer in this very large and very important program. I'd also like to introduce Mike Marino, who's area manager for Jacobs, and more importantly, the city's project program, our Clear Chattanooga program. So he and his staff provide a lot of help in getting these projects done and figuring out how and where to do the projects in the overall program. There we go, works. Today we're going to do an overview of the program. I'm going to give you the status of the program. More importantly, the solutions that we have to get the program done. Even more importantly, the results, and then a look into the future. The consent decree, basically, for many years now, the city of Chattanooga's wastewater system, excuse me, has seen excess overflow, violating our permit with the state and in turn, the federal government, including West Bank. The city was sued by the Tennessee Clean Water Network, a not-for-profit group, the EPA and TDEC. In response to that lawsuit, the city negotiated a settlement called a consent decree, and that's typical with state environmental agencies and the US EPA. The city's consent decree became effective in 2013. Phase 1 started in 2013 and was completed in the year 2020. And then the city started Phase 2. And we'll go into more detail of exactly what that looks like. We've branded the consent decree program, all of the work that we need to do under the consent decree, the Clear Chattanooga program. The program overview, the goals obviously to comply with all the different parts of the consent decree, to reduce overall inflow and infiltration, an engineering term that I try not to use. Basically, that's when our pipes leak from outside in, so that rainwater and groundwater enter our pipes and then go to the wastewater treatment plant and put a tremendous load on our ability to treat water and increase the volume of what goes to a wastewater plant. Number 3, to eliminate chronic sanitary sewer overflows in the system. That's the reverse. That's when our system leaks and raw sewage leaves the pipes and the pump stations. Specifically eliminate the West Bank sanitary sewer overflow, and to increase plant capacity. Those are the goals of the program. Specifically, when it comes to types of projects, we are rehabilitating our pipelines to, as I mentioned earlier, keep them from leaking groundwater and rainwater going into the pipes, producing a unnecessary increase in volume to the plant, reducing SSO, sanitary sewer overflows, where raw sewage leaves our system. Number 2, we're rehabbing pump stations. There's no I&I or inflow problem there, but there is the potential and has been a history of overflows. Number 3, improve the plant to improve reliability and make the plant most cost and environmentally efficient. And then number 4 is our combined sewer overflow treatment facilities. A third concept, combined sewers in all of our older cities in America. In the old days, the stormwater systems and the sanitary sewers intersystems were the same system. And in older sections of our community, they still are. So in parts of Chattanooga, when it rains and water collects on the roof and goes into drain pipes, when water collects in the street and goes into catch basin, that rainwater goes also into our sanitary sewer pipes and then goes to the wastewater treatment plant. There are 2 different major options. Years ago, the city was faced with an option to either tear up all the streets and separate the sewers, which actually I've done before in another city. Extremely expensive, extremely disruptive. The city of Chattanooga chose to go another direction, which is the more common direction, is to build reservoirs and facilities to trap that excess flow so that we can treat it at the wastewater plant in over time and not just on the day it rains. Number 5 is equalization stations. The concept there is so that all the rainwater, all the heavy flow doesn't hit the wastewater plant at the same time, and that over the geographic area, it's kind of spread out over time and over distance. That said, as I promised, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Payne, our city engineer and assistant public works administrator. And Bill has been there through all this from the very beginning. So I want to thank him for his hard work on the program.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, council. It's good to be with you today. So To continue, so as Tom mentioned, there are two different phases in the consent decree. This slide shows the submittals that are required, so there are specific reporting and other milestones that are required. This is showing that we are 100% in compliance with all of the reporting to date. There is still one remaining submittal for phase one that is still yet to be submitted, which will wrap that one up. And then we have submitted 11 of the required submittals that are due so far in phase two. Phase two is a 10-year time period, so it spans from 2020 to 2030. This slide shows the progression of the different projects. So phase one consisted of 74 total projects. Of those, 70 are completed and 4 are currently remaining in construction. And then phase two is 65 different projects, and you can see the variety of different phases those are in, all the way from concept all the way through completion. So 6 of those already having been completed along the way. This slide represents and shows where we are with the spending so far. So in phase one of $277 million that has been appropriated, all of that has been awarded in contracts, and we have paid out 96% of those funds out to the invoices. The remaining amount that has not yet been paid out for invoices corresponds to the projects that are still under completion in phase one. And looking at phase two, there's an estimated budget of $513 million. The prior year appropriations and the fiscal year 23 proposed appropriation, which is currently pending before this council, represents 54% of that budget. So we're after with the fiscal 23 will be 54% appropriated, with 10% of those funds already awarded, and 5% of the total contract value, $26 million, has already been paid out in invoices so far. So good progress along the way so far with financing. We're also staying on track with the budgets. So good job overall on our program management. Council has approved us to apply for WIFIA loans, which is Water Infrastructure Financing Improvement Act, which is EPA funding. There are 4 major projects, just to highlight those. I know we've presented those to you before at certain steps along the way, but just as a reminder, because these do represent $337 million in total project costs. That is the E2I2 program, which is the Environmental and Economic Infrastructure Improvements, which are in conjunction with the Hamilton County Water and Wastewater Treatment Authority and the Industrial Development Board. There are also treatment process improvements for wet weather flows in those combined sewer times that Tom was mentioning earlier out at the treatment plant. That's another $80 million to increase plant capacity. We also have $110 million for the solids process optimization, which will change the way that we process some of our solids. Again, that's to increase our plant capacity. And then the 4th project is $22 million for replacement of the current existing oxygen plant. This slide is just a quick reminder of where those the 3 locations are for the E2I2 program. One at the junction with Red Bank in WWTA between the city and WWTA, the second in East Ridge, and the third on South Lee Highway. The construction on that is anticipated to start next year and will last through the winter of 2026. This is just an aerial overview of the wastewater treatment plant. I mentioned all of the wet weather capacity improvements that are there. The orange or yellow circles, depending on, I think they're orange on your screen. It's the way the color translates. Those just represent the various different areas that are there, just to give you an idea. That construction is expected to start in 2024 and again wrap up by the winter of 2026. This slide shows in green all of the different project locations for the phase 1 of the consent decree. The blue represents areas which we are moving into and focusing on next. The shaded areas represent large basins where there are underground pipes that we need to seal up. The dots and circles that you see represent pump stations and other just singular spot places of infrastructure. There are approximately 20 of those different shaded areas and basins, plus all of the additional pump stations, all of which need to be looked at as we go into those next phases. And just to give an example of what that looks like, this is the Shallowford Road. We currently have a chronic sanitary sewer overflow that occurs along Shallowford Road. This is part of the phase 2 of the consent decree to be addressed during this time period. We have a project which will schedule for this coming fiscal year in fiscal 23 to actually do rehabilitation on the pipes that are in that area in order to reduce that leaking and infiltrating water that's coming into the system in order to reduce that overflow and get it so that we can then move along into continuing stages as we work to eliminate and reduce that overflow. This slide represents is probably the best overall representation of the total impacts of the dollars that are and the projects that are being spent. This begins in 2017, and as you can see, the blue line on the top represents that rainfall amounts in that time period have increased by 11%, but the cumulative effect of all the work that has been performed, we actually have decreased the total volume, essentially the total number of gallons of wastewater that have overflowed has reduced by 82% over that same time period. So while we are seeing more rainfall that's occurring, which means more that we have to deal with, these projects are having a very definite impact, and we will continue to drive that volume amount to continue to push it further down. Just a quick highlight for you. Some of the council may recall the solar panel project that was installed out at the treatment plant. It's already giving us returns on our investment. Our average monthly savings represent 8.6% in the monthly savings that we've already seen in reduction in our purchase power bills. And then just wanted to highlight for the council, this is an aerial view of the equalization basins actually out at the treatment plant. There are a series of blowers there. They consume about 19% of the total plant electricity usage. There is an ongoing project that is working on that, which with the upgrades and the changes there, we anticipate a potential savings of up to 24% of additional electricity usage, energy usage reductions, in addition to providing another more than 8 million gallons of additional storage for wet weathers. And then finally, what's next for the consent decree? So obviously, it's very challenging, as we all know, in the current economic climate. So we will definitely have to keep our eye on that as we move forward, both with inflation, supply chain issues, and other items that need to be navigated through that, and continuing to do all we can to try to mitigate those from having impacts. There will be continued implementations of the Clear Chattanooga program in order to support the overall consent decree program. We have a time extension within the consent decree, which is for our capacity assurance program and for the West Bank sewer overflow, and those are tied directly to the E2I2 agreement with Hamilton County WWTA. So that's the reason for that time extension, is because those are all very closely and very integrated. There, obviously, I mentioned E2I2, the WIFIA and the SRF. Those are very critical sources of funding for us moving forward. So we will continue to stay on top of those as we move forward, as well as I mentioned, those energy reductions, as well as providing us with more redundancy and resiliency overall in our system. And then finally, smart sewers, which was the beginnings of programs in order to make sure that we have intelligent aspects of our network, so that it's easier for us to manage remotely, be able to cut down on travel time for those. And then finally, just a reminder, we do have a separate website for clearchattanooga.com where there's plenty more information on the things I've talked about today, as well as all the other projects that we have. So with that,
I see one question. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill, when we're talking to taxpayers, they ask about, we use the word consent decree. We get a lot of blank stares because they're just something we don't, I guess, talk about. It's not very glamorous. But what impact does it have to your sewer bill? And can you explain a little bit that would help us to cliff note how much longer this will take to get out of? I mean, we cleared the first hurdle on phase one, and that is a really big achievement, and it's a very expensive project. And also, it's also probably very important to note, it's not like we have a choice. It's something we have to do, and that's also something that I try to explain to folks. But can you kind of take that and run with it for a second?
sure, and certainly we know this is certainly had its share of burdens on the ratepayers. There have been a series of rate increases over many years since this started, in order to be able to raise the funds that were necessary, both for the cash we needed as we go along, as well as to pay off the debt service for the others. A lot of these projects, I mentioned, obviously some very expensive projects that are there. There is a significant amount, though, of that funding that we have had to accumulate in advance of these expensive projects. So we are sort of at the cusp of being able to say, and for example, in this year's wastewater budget, this year's rate increase is smaller than previous years. So it's only 6% for this coming year. We certainly, hope to be able to continue and let that become a trend, so that it is less and less. The majority of our projects, though, our most expensive projects, are right in front of us, and a lot of that money is already either in hand from the past rate increases, or it's coming to us in the form of the WIFIA loans and the SRF project. So, it is not something that we anticipate being sustained at the level that it has been over all the years. We certainly will have to keep a sharp eye on where the inflation numbers carry us going forward, and we will have some operation and maintenance expenses, obviously, to be able to continue moving it forward, so we don't wind up in this situation again. I think that's really the biggest takeaway. Is part of the reason we wound up here was because there were things that sort of got pushed down the road a little bit in the past before the consent decree got started, and so we don't want that to happen again. So we will certainly keep our eye on the ball as we move those forward.
Sure. And the follow-up to that is, will
And
we
I'm
ever
sorry,
be
could
out
I-
of the woods?
Could I add one more point?
Sure,
too?
Tom.
I always try to add this when we talk about rate increases for utilities. If you look at other revenue sources that local governments, all governments face, the main ones are property taxes, sales taxes, income taxes. Those all self-correct, self-adjust with inflation.
Right.
So, when somebody says, hey, we didn't raise income tax this year, when the federal government says we're not raising income tax, yeah, they are, because everybody makes a little bit more money in their take-home check, and the percentages are the same. The notable exception is in utility bills for the city of Chattanooga and wastewater. We have to come back every year and increase rates to keep up with inflation, if for no other reason. So the 6% that we have baked into the budget that's working through your approval includes a healthy dose of inflation. And then it also does include a smaller percentage for this program.
Correct.
So it's both.
Because that's normally been 10%, from what I understand.
Yes, that's correct. The last several years have been 9.8% rate
9.8.
increases. Yes,
I
sir.
round that up to 10 in my house,
I understood. Mr. Goldberg is in the back. He would admonish me later if I didn't point out the specific number.
Very good. All right. Thank you.
You good, Chair? Ken Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Bill, and we don't need to, or I'm not interested in exact dollars necessarily, but just curious of the amount of money that the city is investing in infrastructure specifically. How much of that, if any, is being spent outside of the city limits of Chattanooga?
You're asking of the dollars that we've talked about today?
Yep, our budget dollars, what we've spent, what we plan to spend. Is anything budgeted to be spent on infrastructure outside of the city limits?
We're not, there's not any projects that are outside the city limits. Now, of course, the E2 I2 program is a joint program with Hamilton County WWTA, but it's a cost sharing program. So I mean, I think it's a 60-40 split, and that, which has to do with the volumes that are involved, not because of any other reason, but it just has to do with our needs in a particular area, their needs in an adjacent area, and then working on a joint project. So now, specifically beyond that, now certainly, there are some assets that we own which are outside of the Chattanooga city limits proper, but they've been there for years, and those are connection points with the satellite communities from North Georgia and other places where we do, we may own property and own and maintain assets that are outside the city limits. I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding exactly. I mean, I couldn't say at all what types of dollars we're talking about, because we're trying to manage the asset, not necessarily based on a political jurisdiction.
Correct. So the other question related to that is, I know WWTA is going through the same issues with I&I, and I'm sure there's plenty of money being allocated, or at least being requested to be spent there. But since we are on the receiving end of their problem, for lack of a better term, do we feel like the fees, not just our ratepayers being our taxpayers, but our ratepayers being other agencies, governments that may be using our wastewater plant, are those fees also being adjusted accordingly, or are these just our individual taxpayer ratepayers that are seeing these increases?
Well, there are interjurisdictional agreements with our satellite communities, some of which have some contractual items in them. Others are being renegotiated. Different ones are in different stages of that. So certainly, to the extent that our wheelage and treatment numbers are being adjusted, and they're not governed by the specific terms of one of those interjurisdictional agreements, then there are adjustments related to those. But each one has been signed and negotiated at different times, so they don't all have identical language in them.
And are those yearly, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Are those typically real long-term contracts?
They all have varying terms on them based on the time that they were signed. Some of them have just recently been re-signed in the last several years. Others are up for and are being negotiated and are up for renewal.
Yeah, that'd be good to take into consideration, and something to think about. I mean, Tom's comment about inflation, yet we may be in a contractual situation for whatever reason that some of our largest ratepayers aren't feeling the pain that our small ratepayers are. And I just want to make sure that, everybody is putting their share into the system that we're having to maintain.
Certainly.
Thank you, sir.
You good, Councilman Smith? Okay. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your effort as we push toward a clear Chattanooga. Thank you again.
Thank you all.
Is that it? Okay, we're going to adjourn to 6. I got to go to the dark. Yeah, just follow up. Yeah, man. I'm just falling apart. I am.